Good evening, everybody. If you could grab your seats, we're going to get started tonight. So thanks for everybody for coming. This is the fourth in our series of our community conversation meetings. Tonight we're going to be focusing about civics and civic involvement around a lot of land use matters, things that we do in town. A couple quick housekeeping items. Emergency exits, this door, another door there. We can always leave the way you came. Bathrooms are right outside the main door that you came in. When you came in, there's also some note cards that we're passing out if people have questions, or during the break, you can certainly grab those, write down a question for the end when we do the question and answer period. Can everybody hear me okay? All right, good. Just want to make sure the volume's good. So again, tonight we're going to talk a little bit about civics and, getting involved in local government. And people might say, well, why is it important, or what does it have to do with me and my, the things that impact me in Groton? We've been hearing a lot of maybe people not all that thrilled about some of the recent land use decisions around car washes or gas stations or quick lube service stations. And those are things that were identified through our land use patterns in our long-range plan, our plan of conservation and development, and then they get enacted through our zoning. And if you're not happy, or you are happy with the things that you want to see in town, the time to get involved in that is during the development of that long-range plan, Groton 2035. We're about to kick that process off sometime this summer, and that's something, one way for people to get involved. When you think about, why does the town council approve this in the budget or not that in the budget? A lot of those decisions, things are discussed during the development of that plan of conservation and development, that 10-year plan that we develop. Again, the more that we hear from a diverse group of people in town as we're doing that, that's when we start thinking about the things we're going to do from a regulatory perspective, development perspective, budgeting, whether it's the council, whether it's, the things that the RTM might take up and review the approvals. And, we need to hear from people more, not just on the plan of conservation and development, but on a lot of the things that we do. We need you to engage with us. Posting on social media, on a Facebook page, that type of comment doesn't make its way to the staff. We don't know what's happening on all those, forums that are out there. Send an email to us. Help us know what people are thinking if you see something happening in town. So that's kind of, a lot of the thought behind this process we're taking, whether we're talking about housing, affordable housing, how things link together between our zoning and our plan of conservation and development. And then tonight, just kind of focusing a bit on civics, the process, who gets involved and why. So that's really what we're going to talk to you about tonight. Tonight's speaker, Deanna Rhodes, she is the planning director for the city of Norwich. She has been the planner there for a little over 8 years as the director. She's been involved in land use matters for about a little over 30 years. And she's a great colleague of mine. She's a superstar in the planning field, and we're really lucky to have her come and talk about this tonight. So she's going to give a presentation for about 25 minutes or so. Then we're going to take a short break, allow people to work on some of the boards and exercises we have in the back, grab a little more food. Then we'll come back for the question and answer portion, and we'll wrap up the night after that. So again, thanks for coming, and I'll hand things over to Deanna.
Thank you, John, and I'm so excited to be here in the town of Groton. And I've learned so much speaking with John in preparation for tonight about the community, and I'm just blown away because it's so different than so many other communities in Connecticut and really unique, and it gets a great opportunity to talk about civic engagement. So firstly, civics is the study of a citizen's rights and obligations to society. So what that leads to is we all have an obligation to be involved in our community. It's part of our rights as citizens of the United States is to participate in voting, pay our taxes, serve on juries, and do those kind of things that are good for the common community, for the common good. So we're gonna just start talking a little bit about civics. So I'm not gonna read all this about civic engagement, but I'll leave it up here for a minute. It does take time and energy. It's a commitment to be involved in your community. sitting back and expecting other people to be those voices for you doesn't work. So I think the first thing I would say is, if you want your voice heard, you need to be involved. And I'm really happy to learn that a lot of the people here in this audience tonight are involved, which is wonderful. But we want to reach out to other people and to our neighbors and friends to get them involved as well. So we have the Town of Groton's Department of Planning and Economic Development wants to create that broader culture of civic engagement to empower everyone to participate in the important land use decisions. Understanding your community. So here's the map of the Town of Groton. And for me, this was really interesting because I knew about the city of Groton. I knew that they had their own form of government and their own zoning regulations and their plan of conservation, but I was really surprised about Groton Long Point. And I was shown by John, and then we talked about other, NOANC and Mystic and all these different boards and commissions in the community, and how it's somewhat confusing, but also kind of exciting because there's so many ways that you can get involved on a micro level in your community. So it looks like 10 fire districts here, and I think you're more familiar than I am with the uniqueness of each of these areas of your community. But I think it's really interesting, again, about how you can be involved and be part of this wonderful community by being involved in where you live. You can be involved in the town of Groton and be a resident of the city of Groton, live in Mumford Cove, live in Groton Long Point, and be able to participate in the community's plan of conservation and development and other land use boards. So I'm going to talk a little bit about land use and ordinances and zoning regulations for people who are not familiar with them. So ordinances are really the laws of your community, and they're usually established by your council, and then you have your representative town meeting, which is another thing I learned about a lot from John. But the laws are different from your zoning regulations. They are things about, it could be your dog leash laws or park and rec rules that they have rules and laws that are enacted in the community. The zoning regulations are different, and they come specifically after you create your plan of conservation and development. You can update them constantly. The public can come forward and petition to change your zoning regulations at any time through a formal process, but really the community as a whole adopts their zoning regulations and their rules after their plan. They have a plan in place of what they want their vision for the community to be, and then they set those rules in place. And zoning regulations can be appealed through the Zoning Board of Appeals. So you can appeal something if you have a unique situation on your particular property that may not be the same as your neighbors. But ordinances and laws, you can't specifically have those waived to assist you particularly. The 10-year plan of conservation, as John just talked about, they'll be kicking that off really soon. That's where your voice needs to be heard. The community government structure here in Groton is somewhat unique, like I was saying. You have your citizens of Connecticut, then you have your representative town meeting and your town council, which are actually on the same level of your government and your legislature here. And then with your registrar of voters, but then below that falls down those other boards and agencies, and the town manager is under the town council. The town council hires the town manager, interviews them, selects them, hires them, and then they administer all the staff of the different departments of the town. And under those departments is the Planning and Development Office, including the library and parks and recs and all those that you would expect. And the planning division has different items under it, which include community development and zoning and blight, I believe. Is your blight under there? Okay. So your town council, there's 9 elected members, which is pretty significant. And then you are nominated by your political parties. 9 individuals with the greatest number of votes are elected. And from what I understand, those 9 members pick the mayor themselves. So in other communities, the mayor runs separately. And so if they don't get elected as mayor, they're not on the council. So this is the unique that they pick their own mayor. 2-year terms, no compensation. They get to vote on important policies, including those property tax rates, and enact those ordinance, which are your laws. And they appoint that town manager, your town attorney, and members of boards and commissions. Your representative town meeting is very unique. And I think you should be grateful that you have such an opportunity here in Groton to be involved. This is very unique because in most communities you have your council, and those are the only members that are representing you. So you have 45 members on top of your 9 council members that are the voices of your community. So this gives you 45 opportunities to, in theory, to run for a position in your area of the community where you live. So each district elects their number of members allotted to the district based on the population of registered voters that are there. They're 2-year terms, again, no compensation. I do have a question for John. Are they on the same schedule of the elections as the council? Okay, so it all could change over any time, so there's no staggering of that. They vote on the final approval of the town budget, and they have the power to veto the council's legislative ordinances, and they can initiate their own ordinances, their own laws, and bring those if it's not passed by the council. And then it can go to a public vote at referendum. There's a lot of power in your representative town meeting that most communities in Connecticut don't have. It's really interesting. Boards and commissions. So this is the town of Groton we're speaking about, the 27 boards and commissions. Does not include those areas that we talked about, Groton Long Point, Noank, Mystic. Mystic is included in Groton, the city of Groton. But we do know that Mystic does have their own historic district commission. And zoning regulations too? No, okay, I'm sorry about that. So the structure varies between those 27 boards and commissions, but again, these are boards and commissions in the town and not those separate like the city of Groton. Between 5 and 8 members, all volunteers. Members are typically appointed by the town council for a limited term of often 3 to 5 years. So they serve longer than your representative town meeting and your town council, which is great because then it's less politicized because they don't change when everybody else changes. So you have some consistency for a little bit longer time. Often the members must be resident electors, meaning they have to be registered voters. And then they have sometimes some special qualifications, but most do not. A lot of times, not necessarily here, but like say a wetlands commission might have someone that they want to have some background in understanding wetlands or land use. The Groton Hotel, I think that's what it was. Boards and commissions with the role in land use. So these are where I can speak on behalf of myself, and I'm sure on John, it's really super important to us to have really knowledgeable people and people who are passionate to be on land use boards and commissions, because you're making some really big decisions for the community. So some of these, most of these ones here actually have a lot of authority. They receive applications and make decisions, and their decisions are appealable to court. So they're not making recommendations, they are making land use decisions. So Historic District Commission, they, by statute, they issue certificates of appropriateness, certifying that exterior changes to historic buildings are keeping with certain design criteria and are appropriate. And usually if anything falls within a historic district, that needs to go to the Historic District Commission, and they have a lot of power to decide on how things look in those areas. Inland Wetlands Agency regulates and reviews applications for land use activities that affect the wetlands or watercourse areas. They also look at upland areas. The upland in different communities are different width. What is it here? Do you know what the upland is? Varies, okay. So in most cases, I say it's pretty general, 100 feet. So they also regulate activities that could affect wetlands that aren't in the wetlands, but land use disturbances that could affect the wetlands because they're upland of it. So they review those applications and make decisions. And statutorily, any application that goes before your Planning and Zoning Commission that has any wetlands on it has to go to them first, as well as subdivisions. They have to do a review before it goes to the Planning and Zoning Commission. Your Planning and Zoning Commission, they develop and enforce zoning regulations for construction and buildings and land use. They also are the leaders in the plan of conservation and development. They wear two hats. They wear their zoning hat, and then they wear their planning hat. And their planning hat is when they're reviewing subdivisions and when they're reviewing and adopting a plan of conservation development. So they wear that hat. They're only thinking of planning. They're only thinking about the division of land, how it works, not about future uses. They're just really looking specifically about land division and plan of conservation development. When they're wearing their zoning hat, they're enacting zoning regulations. They're looking at site plans, special permits, which are land uses that may be allowed in that zone, but maybe not every specific lot is appropriate for that. So you have criteria in your zoning regulations that say, maybe that car wash is a special permit. Maybe not every property is appropriate for that. So those kind of uses you can put in your zoning regulations that have a higher discretion of review. And so the Planning and Zoning Commission has a lot of authority because they wear those two hats. And the Zoning Board of Appeals, they exist because you have zoning regulations. If you have no zoning regulations, you don't need the Zoning Board of Appeals. And they hear, oh, excuse me. Oh, going back. Nope, I'm sorry. I jumped ahead. Zoning Board of Appeals has two powers. Their power, actually they have three. Their power is to appeal, to hear appeals of the zoning regulations to grant variances for either dimensional requirements, like if you have a setback from a property line that says you have to be 20 feet away, they can reduce that. They can allow for lot coverage to increase where you may have a certain percentage of land that you only allowed to be covered. They can look at any of those dimensional things. They can sometimes look at use changes. So if something in your zoning regulation says it's not allowed there, in some communities, and I'm not sure here, use variances are allowed, which means they can basically override your zoning regulations if someone could make an argument that is a unique hardship particular to that property. They also hear the appeals of the zoning enforcement officer. So if someone gets a decision from a zoning officer that they don't like, or the zoning enforcement officer doesn't make a decision, that's appealable too. Zoning enforcement officer doesn't have to decide on something. They can decide that I'm not going to do anything about this. I don't feel it's an issue. I don't feel it's a violation. And you can appeal that. You can appeal their inaction as a decision, because their decision is that they're not going to take any action. So the ZBA does that. Statutes changed recently, and they used to hear automobile repair locations too, because the DMV didn't want to handle those. So we're getting that away from local again, hopefully. So advisory boards. So there's other land use boards that the planning department and land use commissions deal with, and these are the conservation commissions and economic development commissions. So Conservation Commission goes along really closely to inland wetlands commissions, but they also look at preservation of land in your community. They make recommendations for the plan of conservation and development, and they are very helpful to the planning department in their activity as far as promoting preservation of land. And they have an important role, but there's no decisions that can be appealed by them. They're recommendations only. Economic development commissions are similar in nature because then they look at the trends, they make recommendations to other boards on the council. They're really active when it's time to do your plan of conservation development, because there may be uses that we're not thinking of as planners, that they know on the economic horizon that those are really coming new trendy things, and we should either be thinking about them and adding those, or we really don't want those in our community. Some of the hot things that John had mentioned earlier are typical in all the communities in Connecticut right now. Storage facilities, big thing. People are doing a lot of self-storage facilities. They're doing a lot of car washes. They're doing data centers, big warehouses. Those are really uses that people are concerned about, and some for good reason, and others maybe not. Maybe they're uses that could be appropriate and they bring in taxes to your community. So you have to weigh all that when you're doing the zoning regulations. So economic development commissions and your economic development staff can really be helpful to guide you on what you should be looking at and being more open to in your community. So the town staff with the role in land use obviously is your town manager, appointed directly by the council. He oversees the town departments. He oversees the planning department. Park and Rec is another really important, and public works departments that collaborate a lot with the planning department, because when we're talking about parks and we're talking about streets and roads and complete streets and pedestrian access and transportation, those two departments, those public works and the parks and recs, are really great partners, and they should be really involved in your plan of conservation and development as well. And then the Office of Planning and Development Services has the 4 divisions: planning, inspection services, economic and community development, and sustainability and resilience. And again, I think the star is here that, you know, town staff always gets the short end of the stick, and you know, we don't set those policies. The zoning regulations set those policies, and the zoning regulations are a reflection of the plan of conservation and development, which is a reflection of your wants and needs. And so it all kind of trickles down, and the enforcement of those, if people aren't happy with them, it's unfortunate because they weren't involved at an earlier time. So the graphic distribution of important decision makers in the town of Groton. This is for the this shows the members that are on planning and zoning, historic district commission, ZBA, and inland wetlands, which are again those regulatory boards that you have for land use. And if you really look at it, I thought this was super interesting because it's primarily all in your eastern portion of your community. And so I don't know if there's not an interest in the other portions of the community, and you just have more people who are able to volunteer their time, because it is a commitment, or they're just not knowing about it. You know, you have the Navy, you know, base area, and to me that's, you know, if it's a 2-year commitment to be on a council or something, they're usually a lot of times here longer than that, or they could commit to being on a board or commission. So it's interesting. It's interesting looking at this, and these are also, in no judgmental terms, the more wealthier areas of the community too. So you're having people whose voices are being heard, who have more opportunities sometimes than the people whose voices aren't being heard. So we want to make sure we get a hold of the people who are in these other areas. There's only one for the city of Groton. That's a pretty significant part of your community, and like Groton Bridge, 0, and that's like geographically like the biggest area. So whatever needs to be done for reaching out to people to get on these important land use boards and commissions, they should, because when you're creating zoning regulations, you're creating regulations that, again, separate from the city of Groton and from Long Point, but you're deciding on locations where things can go: commercial businesses, housing, apartments, and sometimes that's dependent on if you have sewer and water there, but sometimes it's not, because you can build housing and subdivisions without, you know, with septic systems. So these people need to be involved. These areas, you need to reach out however you can to get volunteers to come forward to be involved. So again, the people making the decisions don't really represent the entirety of the community. And I'm not familiar enough with your community about the diversity, but you really need diverse population on your boards and commissions. You have their education levels, their background, everybody brings something to the table. It's so important to have that representation. And we want to ensure that they get on here, especially those land use decisions, because they are, again, the ones that are going to be appealed. They're going to court, and you want to make sure that you're representing everyone in your community is behind you when you're going to court. It's taxpayers' dollars you're spending for that. So these were previous community conversations. This is the 4th one, and I guess on one of these, they did not have the board up for where the people came from to come to these meetings. So this is where the little dots are. We're gonna do that tonight so we can kind of get a representation of where you're coming from in the community. But I'm noticing up in that northern portion, on both of those meetings, there's no one here. And from the Navy areas, there's no one here. A little bit more in the city of Groton, which is good, and the same thing with Quantic. But just visually, I think as an outsider, and I think even people who live here, look at this. This is where you're getting a lot of interest, but the gap, so what's the thing that's the most noticeable? You really need to work on those gaps. Okay, how you can get involved. Attend meetings, ask questions, but don't attend meetings until after you have understand what's going on. So coming to a meeting and it's too late because the applications for that, I'm gonna use the example of a car wash because everybody hates those right now. So you're coming and you're against that car wash, but you weren't there when we were enacting the zoning regulations for that. You weren't around when they were working on the plan of conservation and development that said that we don't want car washes in our community and that we want to have these type of businesses, different service businesses that have employees. Some of the problems with these businesses is they're popping up. They have no employees. Yes, they're paying their taxes, but if you want employment for your people who are here and you want to, get your young people their first jobs, having places that have no jobs in them or car washes you just drive through, they're not beneficial in that way for have those growth opportunities that people need for experiences for jobs. So, but attend meetings, ask questions. The social media isn't the place to do it because we don't always pay attention to that and we really can't enter that into the record. So if you're not at a public hearing or a public meeting voicing your opinion, we can't just go, oh, and Joe Smith said this on Facebook or Instagram or something like that. We need to we have to ignore that, even though it could be 100 comments that are negative and no one comes to the meeting and speaks against something and it gets passed. Your voices weren't heard, and that's unfortunate because you weren't at the right place. You weren't doing the right things. So we want you to come to the representative town meetings, be in your town council. That's the second one. Join a board or commission. There's so many opportunities, especially because of all the uniqueness of your community to be on specific boards. ZBA, I think there's multiple ZBAs in the community, so you don't have to be on the town of Groton's ZBA. You can be on the ZBA in the city, or you can be the ZBA somewhere else, the Zoning Board of Appeals. Find out where you want to be involved. I think it's important. Where's your heart? Where's your interest? And look at that. Are you interested in a whole for the community of all of the town of Groton, or are you really just interested in your neighborhood? And that's okay. People have interest in their neighborhoods. Then be on that ZBA there. Because if you're on the ZBA for the town of Groton, and then you're not going to see that application for someone down the road from your house if you live in Groton Long Point. So you want to make sure you know where you're volunteering and what your jurisdictions are. And the land use staff is really here to help you with that if you have questions. They don't make decisions of who gets on boards or commissions. Actually stay completely out of that in my community. I've been asked before, what do you think about this person being on board or commission? I'll work with whoever you give me. We will work with anyone who wants to serve, and that's what our job is to do, and to educate you on what your job is on that board or commission. But I'm not gonna skew it to be people that I think will listen to me, because they don't always, and that's okay. So join a board or commission, but find out where you want to be in doing that. And again, vacancies, the town clerk has that information. Consider running for the town council or representative town meeting. 45 slots, that's pretty awesome. And you have a lot of power, You have power on your budget, you have power on ordinances, you can submit your own ordinances. I think that's amazing. So there's a lot of opportunities to get involved and to share your voice, share your passion, share your love for your community. Because you wouldn't be here if you didn't care about it. And then provide feedback and voice your opinion. So there is a website here, greatergroton.com, to provide your feedback on projects, speak during public communication portions of those meetings, the town council and representative town meetings, and during any public hearings. You can always send emails to planning staff on projects or to elected officials or on town-related business. If you want to send an email about an application because you can't be at a meeting, you can do that. You can send that. State it in the subject line that it's for a public hearing, blah, 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 this application, and you want it to be in as testimony. If you tell us that it wants to be as testimony, we will read it into the record, even if you can't come. So you have an opportunity, if you can't make a meeting, to have your voice heard. I would just say, my last comment would be, get involved really early. Don't wait until there's some problem that you're like, I'm really angry about. And because then you're so narrow-minded and focused that you only want to be involved because of that thing, and all the other interesting applications that come before you, you're not really care about because you were there, because you didn't want, for an example, affordable housing, or you didn't want this, or there's something in your neighborhood. if you like affordable housing and you feel that there's a need for that, I'm sure there's a board or commission you can get involved that really will focus on that. But you also can be on a planning and zoning commission and for the community if you want to see those kind of things. We don't bring in, people have this perception that the planning department brings in the applications. Like hey, come to Groton, we want this application. Comes here, that's what economic development does. They do the promotion, they get people here. What the planning staff does is deals with the applications when they come in, the zoning staff, and look at our regulations, look at our plan and say, does this match what the community has told us they want? So if you don't want what's in your regulations right now, this is the perfect time to get involved. Like, this is the perfect time because you're gonna be working on your new plan of conservation and development to start thinking about what you love about Groton, what you want to save. Those are the things, those are priorities too. It's not just what you don't want. What do we love? What is my favorite things here that needs to be treasured and never go away? Those kind of things, they're, landscapes that you want to save and stone walls. I mean, it can be something as simple as that you have that no one's thinking about. Those things can go in your plan and they can become regulations that are protected later on. So why get involved? Because of all the great reasons to get involved. But build relationship with your neighbors and fellow community members. You'll meet a lot of different people who have different, whether they're religious beliefs, socioeconomic differences, but it gives you an opportunity to mix with people that you wouldn't normally know. And it gives you perspective on life because everybody brings something different to the table and their politics are all different. And it's interesting. I think it's great to learn from people. You may think that you are a hard line on something until you hear someone else's opinion on it and you're like, you know what? They make a lot of sense and it changes your mind. So I think one of the things to get involved, whether it's on board or commission or just coming to meetings, to hear other people's voices. Learn about your local issues and government process. Enhance your personal and professional skills. And then make a difference again in your community and see all the impacts around you. There's nothing better, I think, for a commission member, and they get excited, like, what's the status of that project? And when they know it's happening, and that they decided on it, and that they asked for certain things to be done, and enhance the landscaping and things, there's a sense of pride that they kind of feel like it's theirs. There's like an ownness to that, that project looks really good. And so I think that alone, to know that you drive by there and that your input and your comments and your involvement made a difference while you're on that board, or whether you come to the meetings and just say, hey, I live nearby and having hedges here would make a difference for a buffer. And then that buffer gets in and it's enhanced, and knowing that your voice made that happen and it made your quality of life better is the difference. So I have nothing else to say to you about civics and civics engagement, but we are here for you to ask us questions. You all have cards, and we'll go around and take care of that.
So thank you, Deanna. All right, so thank you very much. So we'll take, really appreciate it, thank you. So we'll take about a 15-minute, 20-minute breakout. We got some boards we'll flip over with some sticky dot exercises, some other things. I think we want some notes, some feedback from people. Again, this is one of those processes where we're trying to learn more from you about how we can best help, how we can get you engaged. And, I think Deanna did a really good job about the importance in when you can get engaged. We as planners always try to come up with, how can we get people to come out? Because most of the time we hear people come out, they come out against things. So, do we create an ad about, we're planning data centers here in Groton, everybody come out. Oh, we're not really planning them. We just did in the past, and now we got 300 people here. Let's talk about the plan of conservation and development. We almost have to trick you to get people to come out to some of these meetings. But we don't want to have to, resort to those tactics. Instead, we just like to get your honest feedback from things. So again, we'll break out for about 15 or 20 minutes. Then again, there's some note cards. Write questions down on those, hand them to somebody on the staff. We'll come back, go through the question and answer session, and hope to get everybody out of here by about 7:15. There's still some food in the back too, so thanks, and don't leave yet.
Let's see.
All right, so we'll just kind of go back and forth here with some of the questions. So How does one get involved with the plan of conservation and development? That is a great question. I didn't plant that one, I promise.
He did.
Yeah. So there's a number of ways. One, feel free to shoot an email to myself, to staff of, hey, I want to get involved with this. Pretty soon, I'm trying to think if we have it up here, our Greater Groton page. There's a Scan Me here. We have cards for Greater Groton around, and that's something we're gonna have a page on our Greater Groton website talking about the plan of conservation and development, how to get involved with it. Lela in the back is holding one of those cards right now. If anybody comes and grabs one, there's also some other information. If you sign in on the sign-up sheet, we will get your name on an email list and you'll get all notification of what's happening with our plan of conservation and development. So that's a great place to start. You don't have to come to every meeting. If you know, a lot of these events we're recording so you can watch them from your home. A lot of our meetings we do via Zoom for our Planning and Zoning Commission meetings. And if you want to just share some comments, there'll be surveys, there'll be a lot of interactive exercises. Sometime in the next month or so, we'll be talking about kind of announcing the group that's going to be helping us do that plan of conservation and development. Probably sometime late summer, early fall, we'll have some type of a kickoff event, you know, with some of the boards and commissions that are involved and really trying to get some community engagement. And I think we'll probably be out at some, you know, summer events this year, trying to just get people engaged and involved. So. If you want to read it.
Sure. How can you get information on the various boards and commissions, and what does each board and commission do? So I think go to the town, firstly, the town clerk always has information about the boards and commissions, and they can tell you when the timeframes of different membership is going to be up. So if someone's going to be expired soon, they'll have those lists and they'll know what their open vacancies are not. And they should be able to share with you what their charge is. Usually, again, your ordinance of your community, when you create a board or commission, they have to have a charge. They have to tell how many people are going to be on that board and commission and what their responsibilities are. So the town clerk's going to have all that information. But if you have specific questions about land use boards, I think you can call the land use office and speak to the planning department, and they can share these information about if there's vacancies on boards and commissions and land use.
Yeah, and we have a list over here of all the current vacant positions on our land use boards, commissions, and other boards and commissions, not just the ones dealing with land use in the town. So, you know, we're all partial to land use because that's what we do, and we really like that. But there's other boards and commissions people can get involved with as well. How do the town council and the RTM interact with each other? So by charter, there's certain roles that the town council has and certain duties that they have. I'm trying to think of, I feel like we had a slide for that. You know, again, the council, both are elected bodies, and there'll be certain things that the town council might refer to the RTM. If the town council passes an ordinance, the RTM has the ability to veto that. During the budget process, you know, how the town council goes over things and then how the RTM does. So there is that kind of working relationship that's set up in the town's charter, which is, you know, there's regulations, there's ordinances, there's the charter, which is kind of, you know, a lot of the rules that set how the town really functions. So all of that is really dictated within that. You know, again, they both have certain duties, so there's a balance of power, very similar to, you know, at the federal government level, you know, judicial, executive, legislative. There's very similar things that happen within our own government when you look at the council, the RTM, our boards and commissions, the zoning board of appeals, how things all happen. You can see elements of that very structure, you know, kind of bringing you back to, you know, high school history class and the things that you learned. All that applies here.
So I'm going to partially answer this one, and then I'm going to have John chime in for sure. So how and when were the historic district boundaries set, and how can they be changed? I can't tell you when the historic district boundaries were set, but there is a statutory process for historic district commissions, and it's separate from planning and zoning commissions. So that historic district commission would probably be the one that would start that process, but they would need to know what the district boundaries, what you might want them to be. So a lot of times those historic districts are come out of National Register properties, and they should be expanded because you have support from like SHPO, which is the State Historic Preservation Office. So, but if you feel that the district is, I'm just going to say, too small, you should be talking to Historic District Commission members and saying, hey, we think it should be expanded to this, and this is the reasons why. They may, before they change that district boundary, they really need to work with SHPO and see, are the structures that are there, those buildings, worthy of being in the district? In the districts, not every building is always contributing. And what that means is that there could be a district and there's that one or two odd houses that were, you know, built in the 1970s or something like that, that at the time weren't when the district was made. So those would be not contributing type of buildings. But as time goes on, those buildings might have significance because they are now a great example of that period of architecture and maybe can be changed to be a contributing building in that district. So there's a lot that needs to go into to change the boundaries, but the Historic District Commission needs to work on that, and they could help. The planning department can really help with that as well. And then this one I can answer too. Are the zoning areas set in stone, or can they be changed? And how would someone go about getting those changed? Example of changing a 4-acre lot area changed to 2 acres. So what you need to do is, and you're very lucky here because you have a planning and zoning commission. And the community that I work in, we don't. We have a zoning authority, which is our city council. Totally different, very hard to deal with, and is only 4 of them in the state of Connecticut that work that way. So having a planning and zoning commission, you can apply for a map amendment or a text change. And what that means is if you want to change the zoning boundaries to have, to say that there's a zone that's right now there's a 4-acre zone and you want to change that to be a 2-acre zone, you could maybe, it depends on your zoning, what the zone is. If you change the boundaries of that, that's a map amendment. If you change the language in your zoning regulations, the words, the text, that's a text amendment. You can actually submit as a citizen those amendment applications. You have to pay the fee, and you have to represent yourself or your interests. But when you're representing it for a larger area, you better make sure that you have some support behind you, because you want to change zoning from 4 acres to 2 as a text amendment. It affects everybody who's already feels comfortable with the 4-acre zoning going down to 2. So you just have, but you can't micromanage it either and say, I only want it to happen here on this street to be this way so I can subdivide and get 2 lots. So you kind of have to look globally at zoning, and that's why it comes after your POCD. So if you want that zoning to change from a 4-acre to 2-acre, that should be something that's discussed and talked about and considered during your plan of conservation development. So the zoning regulations then reflect it. It's harder to go as an applicant in front of boards and commissions to change zoning regulations, I think, than it is the community themselves changing theirs. And that's just fair to say, because you're putting it out there as one person, and it's going to affect many people. But if the community's putting out there, the Planning and Zoning Commission is saying, this is what we want to do on your behalf, it's a better sell.
And that's why it's so important to do that during the process of the development of the plan of conservation and development. Time frame from the Historic District Commission regs.
When was it set?
I know that they've been around longer than I have. I think they were adopted before I was born. I think it was the early 70s. Getting some general nods from some folks in the staff. I'd have to phone a friend on that one to get an exact date. How you expand the boundaries, you'd work with the Historic District Commission. I believe there's some town council action that has to happen as part of it, and probably, again, some state action that has to get involved with historic district boundaries, at least with the SHPO.
In remembering, just like any other amendment that you want to change, not everybody's going to be supportive of you wanting that boundary to be bigger, because yes, you want to preserve structures and you have a passion for historic preservation. But what happens if you make that boundary bigger? Those people now have to fall underneath those new regulations and those, especially those exterior changes to their building. So not everybody's going to jump for joy that, the same thing happens if you want to, you can petition to get something on the National Register that you don't own, and you can feel that it's a significant property to all of us as United States citizens. Doesn't mean the owner is going to be really happy that you're trying to petition to put their property on the National Register, because then that takes away some of their potential rights of what they had planned to do there. So it's one of those give and takes.
Yeah.
What about the opposite? Maybe even small
Same process. It would be just a process, no different than expanding it for reducing the size of the historic district. So next question, why does it need to be approved by a political party to be considered for a committee, for a board or commission? So good question. One, you don't have to belong to a particular party. I don't have the exact answer of why. I think it might be something that was in the charter, but if you want the answer to that question, reach out to the town clerk. She's the one that would help you through that process. If you want to apply to a board or committee, she will then direct it through the political committees and make sure that it is heard before the town council. The appointments committee, the chair of the council appointments committee is here tonight. It's one of our council members. So that's something that if you have real detailed questions, reach out to the town clerk's office and she could totally help you with that.
And this is a tag along on that one.
All right. Yeah, why do applications for boards and commissions positions take so long to process or approve? So again, it has to go through that local political selection committee process. It goes before the town councils. They have a board commission review committee, and then it goes to the council for a vote. So things take time in Groton. And you know, to some people
they take time everywhere.
They do. But government doesn't move fast, and I think a lot of people like that because sometimes if we move too fast, maybe the decisions we make there wasn't enough thought. But you got to find that balance of, all right, are things going fast enough to respond to what's happening in the world around us? So.
Absolutely. All right, some of these are really Groton specific that you're just going to have to jump in on. Are inflatable and feather signs allowed? And if zoning laws could go unenforced, why should we participate in the planning process? So I'm going to try to talk about the second part of that. So not every zoning issue for one person that's their total thing that's grating them. That feather sign is grating me so much. But when you balance as in a staff, when you're managing a department, you look at what are the priorities. And even though that one thing may be like for you, the really something that stands out, but if you have issues that are really, glaring, there's additions that are going on without permits, or if you have blight issues, that you have trash and garbage, you kind of have to decide of what are the priorities. And one of the things with signage, it's always a really difficult one to make a priority for enforcement, is because there's that balance of, and I'm not pointing at economic development here, but there's always, I know in communities that push and pull, because those businesses put those signs up sometimes because they need it to get attention to, hey, we're here and we're struggling. And so it becomes a little bit, not saying that we ignore that from a zoning standpoint, but it's like if you have that or you have a major issue going on, a drainage issue or erosion or something from another zoning issue, you put that as a lower priority. But it's not that it's not really necessarily getting enforced, but when you do signage things, it's almost like you have to do it as systematic. You have to decide, we're going after all the signs. We're doing a sign enforcement. Someone's going out there and you're gonna look for every single one of these feather signs and inflatable signs, and you get to hit them all. Because the first thing you're gonna get from that business owner that you said to take down their feather sign is, that guy a mile down the road has one, and he's got an inflatable at his car dealership. So you kind of have to hit them all at once. So it's sort of a staffing issue, at least in my community, of what are your priorities, and are we ready to do this to everybody? And again, economic development, hey, we're gonna hit every car dealership that has these inflatables, and we're telling you now. And those aren't always the most popular things to do right away. But it doesn't mean that they shouldn't be enforced. That's, again, you can appeal. If you don't think something's being enforced, you can appeal to the Zoning Board of Appeals that there's inaction. Their inaction is action, and you could appeal that decision by that zoning enforcement officer if you really were taken to heart that that sign was that bothersome to you.
And one of the things that, I mean, funny, just last week we were talking, so we have one person that does really like code enforcement, blight enforcement, enforces these zoning regulations and goes out looking for violations throughout the whole town. And that's a lot for the shoulders of one person. And just last week, we were talking about those crazy inflatable signs, and maybe that's what somebody was asking about in the Route 1 area, not far from here. I think there's a couple of them that we said, hey, all right, those have been up, we got to get those down. So some action's going to be happening on those. But we also, because we're limited in staff, we don't go looking for trouble. That's kind of what I usually tell people. But if there's something that's glaring, send me an email. Send my zoning enforcement officer, Tom Zanarini, send him an email, copy his boss, Tim Brennan, and hey, I'm concerned about X, I'm concerned about Y. You know, I drove by a couple of business properties yesterday that were vacant, that the grass was this tall, the buildings are blighted. And I brought it up today with my manager of inspection services that, all right, that's something we gotta have Tom go take a look at, and that's gotta get cleaned up, because we don't want our community to fall into a state of disrepair, nor do we want to just have signs up everywhere and, you know, and zoning that's not enforced. So we do the best that we can with the staff that we have.
Absolutely. And I think another thing is a lot of times people will make complaints to us, but they're like, they want to be anonymous. You know, we want to stay anonymous, and that's fine to some extent. But if the town of Groton is going to take that thing to the full extent of the law to enforce something that's really bothering you and bring it, you know, to the zoning board of appeals, and then go, you know, ends up going to court because the person appeals the ZBA, you know what, it's going to be better when we know that there's someone behind there that has their name that really bothered, you know, that bothered them. Because again, spending taxpayers' dollars to go to court to defend something that was a complaint, when maybe there's something else on another road that's the same thing. So if we're gonna go to court, we're gonna say, but I have a complaint. There's the complaint on this one, because they'll bring it up in court and say, you're not going after that guy. But you know what? I got a complaint, and that's why we worked on this one. You know, so it's really important that if something bothers you, that you do stick your neck out, because the community is sticking their neck out too.
Yeah. You know, the team all knows I really like to quote movie lines all the time. So little Jerry Maguire, help me help you. Exactly. You know, when it comes to this kind of stuff, the more we know, the more you're involved, the more you communicate with us, the better we can help you. Is a deed restriction an ordinance or zoning? It is neither. So a deed restriction is something that was put on the property that you have, that one of your neighbors has, that is enforceable maybe by the person or entity that put that deed restriction on there. So that's not, generally the town is not enforcing deed restrictions unless we own a conservation easement or we own some other right to that deed restriction or that, that right in that property.
So a big thing in like the 90s was size of homes, deed restrictions that said if you were going to build in this subdivision, you had to be this size square footage house. You couldn't have a line for your laundry in your yard. You couldn't park your RV there and all those kind of things, because they wanted to create a neighborhood, the developer, that everybody would be the same, and they would all buy into that living there with those rules. But if someone comes in and wants to build a house smaller than that on that lot and it meets the zoning regulations, we do not enforce those deed restrictions that were put on there. It would be the responsibility of someone who bought into that development that had that deed restriction, or the neighbors, to sue that person, because it's really a civil matter. Again, we don't ask for those kind of deed restrictions to be put on properties, except for if we need a conservation easement, a drainage easement that benefits the community. So there's very few things that we ask for those kind of easements on and deed restrictions. So everything, a majority of that stuff is not enforceable by the community. So you want to make sure that, you know, if you buy a property or that has a deed restriction on it, that you have that, know that you could potentially be sued. If you're putting something in a shared driveway and you want to put a fence up there, it's like, you know, the shared driveway it was an old one or something and had an easement on it, or a deed restriction. You're going to be it's going to be a civil matter, and the community is not going to really get involved. This one's a big one for you.
Yeah, I can't talk about this one because of court. No, so has the matter of data centers been settled? There is much negative press about communities with existing data centers have many problems. So our Planning and Zoning Commission adopted regulations around data centers. Are they allowed in town? Yes, with a lot of restrictions, maximum sizes, special permits. There's a lot of requirements, and there's a process for that. We do not have any pending applications for a data center. So, you know, had they been resolved, I think for most of the practical purposes of if somebody wants one in town, they're gonna have to apply for it through our zoning regulations, and they're pretty darn strict of what they allow and what they don't allow. So I don't expect to see some, mega global scale data center because they're not allowed by our zoning regulations.
I think I can answer this one, but you definitely can chime in. Why are Groton Long Point residents allowed to serve on the town planning and zoning and the zoning board of appeals? They don't live in the areas of the town the regulations relate to. That is true. They don't probably, but they're also members and they're citizens of the town of Groton. So if they have interest in the community as a whole, they may want to serve on a board that's for the town of Groton. It may not apply to them in their own home, and that's what we talked earlier when I was speaking about. If you really care about your specific neighborhood and you really care about the zoning regulations there, maybe that and you're in Groton Long Point, then you serve over there on one of their boards or commissions. But it doesn't exclude them from being involved in the community as a whole. And this kind of leads to your POCD, and we were having this conversation. The community has one plan of conservation and development that's municipally required by state statute. And the town of Groton is the town of Groton, but there is multiple POCDs in your community for some of these other areas. And so my question was, whoa, what if they don't keep up with their 10 years? It doesn't really matter because you have the one that's the most important. You're all part of the same community. You're all part of the town of Groton. So they may have their own little sub-communities, boroughs, but they're still town of Groton, so they can serve. Again, it may be philosophically difficult because other people are making decisions that they don't have to necessarily, doesn't apply to them where they live, and they're making decisions on applications in a different part of the community. But that's sort of how it is anywhere. It really is that you have a right to serve in your community, and you can't be excluded just because you live in one of those neighborhoods.
No, they're spot on. So that's all we have for questions, and look at that, 7:15, right on the, maybe 7:16.
Any last minute ones though? Anything that came up from our discussions that I have another question? Did anyone have anything that popped up? These are really hard land use decisions that get made by these boards and commissions, and for all your boards and commissions. And you're all really intelligent people. You're here tonight, so that shows me something, and that you have interest in your community. So really think about serving. If you're not serving now, you do have something to bring to the table, and in your opinion is very valued and worthy. And we need young people. We need people of different ethnicities. We need different languages spoken on boards and committees, because now we're getting a lot of applicants in our community that English is a second language. And so, we do need members that are understanding of that. So everybody needs to be included. So anyone who's of age of voting that's able to serve should, or at least consider it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. Really appreciate the questions, and thanks again for coming.